And I had people sit right across the table from me,
Yeah.
and the most evil people I could ever imagine. And they said to me, so listen, we've got this byproduct, and we heard that municipalities are buying it to put in their water supply. And I want to know, how do we get into that market? Because we've got some byproduct, and we heard that rather than paying to throw it away, people will actually buy it from us. And I said, so let me get this straight. You've got fluorides that you want to sell to towns to dump it in reservoirs, right? He said, yeah. He's like, can you help me with that? And I said, yeah, let's just put this stuff in the water supply. No, tea is my go-to beverage now because coffee is just too harsh, too harsh on the digestive system. It's good for different reasons, but I got my matcha. I usually do green tea. What kind of tea is your preference?
Depends on the time of day. I do chamomile at night, and then during the day, like right now, I'm drinking a yogi tea that's called positivity.
Okay, all right, there you
It's
go.
like an orange citrus, a little bit of caffeine in it. It's lovely.
that's cool.
Very nice.
Green tea. I drink a lot of green tea. So it just depends.
Same.
I like tea though. I
What
also
about
love
tea?
coffee.
Bulletproof coffee.
I'm only allowed to drink coffee at certain times because my wife says it makes me cranky later. It's like I have bad behavior on the days that I have coffee, so she limits my coffee intake. But tea agrees.
Is it your caffeine intake just makes you grumpy? You crash in the afternoon?
I think it has to do with like adrenaline and sugar levels and digestion. I don't know. I'm not sure, but maybe
Do you,
it's more
do you
acidic.
put anything in your coffee when you drink it?
I take it with maple syrup, like organic maple syrup, because it cuts the pH.
Yeah.
It makes it much more
Yep.
palatable and kind of that rounded taste, if you will. So I travel
And
with my own
depending on
organic maple syrup.
you make your own syrup?
No. I travel with it in my bag. Like if I go to an event and they don't have maple syrup or they don't have organic maple syrup, kind of a maple syrup snob, I have my own with me.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain you're gonna have a hard time running into places that are carrying organic maple syrup.
It's true. So I just have
that's
my own. I don't have my own bottle in my bag. So I just I bring this with me everywhere I go. But
good. That's awesome.
nice.
I put
So
maple syrup in my coffee, in one of my coffees as well. I have a couple different recipes that I use. And
Is there something to maple syrup that everybody's so
number
excited
one,
with
it's
it?
a whole sugar, so it's easy to digest.
Yeah.
The body doesn't cause your blood sugar to spike when you have it. It's really digestible, bioavailable, and it's not riddled with everything else that they put in sugar. So it's good for you. And sugar increases the acidity of coffee, so it makes it even kind of harder to drink and more acidic. But maple syrup makes it less acidic and reduces the pH, so your body does better on it anyway. So, and I was surprised. So I'll tell you a quick story while we kick off here. So a long time ago, when I was with a research firm in my earlier days, Green Mountain Coffee was a client, and Green Mountain is in Waterbury, Vermont. And of all the places on the planet, I figured they would use maple syrup in their coffee all the time. So when I went to their
100%.
headquarters for a meeting, and they said, "Hey, how would you like your coffee? What flavor would you like?" And they had everything in the world to pick from, as you can imagine. I was like, "Oh yeah, and I'm sure you guys have maple syrup here, right?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Well, don't you guys put maple syrup in your coffee in Vermont? You're like the Vermont is like the maple syrup capital of the world." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" So I said, "Well, I've been doing this for 5 years, and I'd really like to see your reaction when you try your coffee with some maple syrup in it." So everybody in the room tried maple syrup in their coffee, and they were like, "Holy shit, this is amazing! Why have we not been doing this?" And I'm going, "How is this not a thing? Like everybody in Vermont should be doing it." So they made a special K-cup called French Toast, and they also had a special at their. They have a. It's almost like a Starbucks, but really crunchy at their headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
It's picture like a Starbucks in like a log cabin, basically, and in their welcome center. And so they started doing this signature beverage that was maple syrup on the outside of the cup, and then they pour the coffee inside, and it became their favorite drink at the welcome center. So there's a K-cup. It was a limited time, and I think I've got one somewhere around here. But I love that. You take those things for granted, but
I knew there's something special about maple. I know there's something about something special about maple syrup. I love the flavor, and I love maple whiskey. So
Yeah, maple
Maple
anything is good.
whiskey.
Maple bacon. Oh my
Sure.
God, do that all day.
Why wouldn't you? I
yeah,
do. I have it's collagen protein, vanilla collagen protein, peanut butter protein, MCT oil, and maple syrup. That's
Very nice. Is
one
the
of my
MCT like
recipes.
coconut oil, or is it like a different type of amino
Refined
acid?
refined
Yeah,
coconut
yeah.
oil. Yeah.
Nice. I like the virgin stuff, but I know where you're getting at there. Medium chain fatty acids there, Frank. Good stuff for you.
Triglycerides. Yep.
I
Yep.
love it.
Good for brain food. And
I
if I
love that
have
you
that
guys.
in
That's
the
right.
morning, I generally
I
get
love that
my
you guys
meat.
are both biohackers. I want to get into biohacking
Yeah, I
for
mean,
sure.
you're gonna learn a lot just being here, buddy. So we'll fix you up. We'll fix you up real nice. Um,
Sounds good.
do you get into like superfoods as well? I know you're into like nutraceuticals and
For sure. But seems like every week there's a new superfood. So, but I certainly I keep my kind of pulse on what's
what's
going on there. So yeah, but
what's your
I don't
favorite
get
superfood?
really really most of the native stuff, like native to the area. Like I've tried like this came out of the rainforest stuff, but I was drinking yerba mate before it was
Okay,
cool and it tastes
sure.
like dirt.
Hmm.
I remember when quinoa was considered a superfood. I still like quinoa.
Love quinoa.
I like
So
all my dark berries. I raise them. They're all here: blackberries, blueberries, all the
yep.
dark purpley blue stuff. Um,
I have a terrible time growing blueberries, but I love blueberries. We consume them by the quart every day. It's wild, but I can't grow them to save my life.
well, they want normally when people screw up their blueberries, it's because they have two sensitivities. One, they
Yep.
love water, but they don't like sitting in water.
Okay.
Right? So they're a bog plant, not unlike cranberries and huckleberries, which are kind of a close relative. So they like water, but they don't like sitting in water. So that's tricky.
Got it.
You're like getting the moisture just right. And then the thing that most people screw up is they really like acidic soil. So
So
you have to get your
like mulch beds. Yeah.
yeah, and way more on the acidic side, like very very on
Acidic.
the acidic side.
Okay.
Hmm.
I'll
Um,
have to try that out.
that's normally, and
Um,
so I actually add fertilizer, organic fertilizer that's for acidic plants, and that
okay.
seems to do us
Interesting.
pretty well.
Oh, I'll have to try
But
that. Yeah, those are the two things. I've got a green thumb most of the time. I can grow pot plants to the ceiling, but for some reason I just can't grow blueberries or lavender, and those are my two favorite like plants that I want to grow. But
that's
so
this. We're going to turn the front end of the property into a lavender farm. We've got
oh
a ton of lavender on the property. I'm with you. I'm a big fan of lavender too. Although it's a proestrogen plant, so you want to be careful about how much you use it as a male. But it has a lot
yeah
of
yeah
really great uses.
yeah
Interesting.
like soy and everything else, right? You just gotta
Soy is
watch out.
another one you want to watch out for. And soy is added to so much stuff now. And then
Everything.
tea tree oil, another good one that's
Yeah.
in a lot of male products, that's also proestrogen. So you want to be careful of those things. Just don't get too much of
Good
it.
point. Good point.
Have you guys ever done a plant based diet?
Oh, absolutely. So when I met my
Yeah.
wife, we both just had a pretty standard American diet, and then right before we got married, she's like, you know what? I think I'm gonna be a vegetarian. And I was like, what are you talking about? That makes me a vegetarian by default, right? And she said, no, you can still do what you want. You just got to make sure that I'm well fed and happy. So I said, okay, well
Yeah.
that sounds fine. I think I can be supportive of that. And then on the honeymoon after we got married, she said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to be a vegetarian anymore. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. I mean, this is a good development for me. And she said, I think I'm going to be a vegan. I'm going to be a
Oh,
vegan,
no.
and I need you to get rid of all your leather shoes and your leather jacket because it disgusts me. And we're going to watch this video together.
Oh,
It's called Meet Your Meat, and
yeah.
not meat, not that Frank, but
Yeah.
Meet Your Meat,
Yeah.
and it's about
Yeah.
the factory farming industry. So I went all in, and as a supportive, early in the relationship and the marriage, I was like, let's do this. So she was vegetarian and vegan for probably about 3.5 years until our first was born, and she felt like she wasn't getting enough protein. I lasted about 3 months, and then
Yep.
I was cooking lamb chops like a fiend while she was sleeping, and like
Yeah.
I'd be like airing out the house and getting rid of like the stuff in the
Yeah.
dumpster out down the street.
The reason I was laughing is my wife too, in college, she watched like some video on how, horrible
Oh,
the industry
it's
is.
terrible.
And so to this day, she will not eat any red meat whatsoever, because she
I
just
get it.
thinks it's horrific. She thinks like, animals are slaughtered by their friends, and like that's how she explains it. Like their best friends are
Yeah.
being slaughtered right in front of them.
It's
So,
pretty terrible, and the whole industry is like that. But I grew up I was a meat cutter. My first job was in a meat department, so this is kind of built into me. I've been to farms. I went to make sure they were humanely raised, and I had a kind of a different perspective than what I was seeing on the videos. I was like, that's not really like that. But then some really are. Some factory farms are atrocious. So I think it really educated me about how we choose our foods, how close to our source of food are, how we educate our kids about food. I mean, we raise
100%.
chickens and we eat chicken almost every night of the week, right? So, there's a closeness to our food that we've lost as a society. And I think that's a big part of coming back to our humanity, is learning where our food is from, sourcing our food, and not eating meat every meal. We eat, I've got a killer repertoire now. I actually wrote a business plan for a vegan restaurant as an MBA, and I wanted to make it a franchise for people to try things, other than their regular standard diet, to give them an otherworldly experience. And so I've got this coconut lentil dish and collard greens with amino acids that anybody in the world would be like, "Holy shit, this is amazing! This food like slaps." So if that's what the kids say these
Coconut
days.
lentil, or are you going curry there, I'm guessing then?
Yeah, coconut curry lentils, and it's just
Yeah.
like it's like a comfort food.
yeah.
It's like a warm stew. You're
You,
just like, oh god.
you know what I
Over
find funny
quinoa.
though? You know what I find really funny is that people that are on carnivore diets, they prefer plant-based meats, like the grass-fed, like all
Yeah.
the cows are grass-fed,
Well,
right?
yeah.
They,
There's a
they
lot to
prefer
that.
their meat to be plant-based.
Well, it's funny. The only thing that can produce proteins, that can actually make new proteins, is plants, right? Animals that have a lot of protein in them, whether it's gorillas or whales or other, are eating mostly a plant-based diet. But there is something to the grass-fed beef that's beyond, what's kind of trendy is the ratio of omega 3s, 6s, and 9s in
Yeah.
beef or
Yeah,
cattle that are fed corn-based diets, that have a whole lot of byproducts and other things in it. That's not a cow's natural diet. When you feed a cow its natural diet, it creates the right type of amino acids and the right type of proteins that aren't carcinogens. If you eat cow that's raised on corn, it produces a lot more mutations in your DNA. So that's the benefit of grass-fed beef. It doesn't taste better. It's better, in terms of the types of
I,
protein.
correct me if I'm wrong, but like omega 9 fatty acids, right? Are
3, 6,
are,
and 9 are all
are
fatty acids.
yeah, 369 are all fatty acids. They're really natural anticoagulants, correct?
Sure, but it's the
Yeah.
ratio of those things in the protein that you're consuming that makes the difference, right?
Yeah, my dad used to take a blood clotting medication. I think it was Coumadin,
Yeah.
and I
That's
was like, I
mostly
need to
rat
find out.
poison.
Was that?
That's
Yeah,
mostly rat poison. Literally, arsenic.
yeah. I got him off of it, and I started giving him omega fatty acids.
There you
I
go.
remember I was like, we got to try this because Coumadin. There's so many reports of people having adverse effects. So I don't know,
It's an
but
effective blood thinner. I mean, that's why it's poisonous, but maybe everything in its dose, right? But
Yeah, that's right.
Jeff, you said something that I want to come back to as part of our theme of some of the things we've been talking about. This is why, like, I'm a huge fan of capitalism, but I start to get really frustrated when everything becomes about money, right? Because the reason why we are using corn to feed our cows is it's cheaper, it's a byproduct, right? And like I got the property right in front of me. He's got 100 acres of cornfield, but it's not selling it for food. He turns it into biofuel. They come
Yep.
and pull it out every
Ethanol.
year, and
Sure.
it's like the up and down of it is a lot of these things that sometimes become, in many cases, become unhealthy or not the greatest food source is because we were solving for profit, not health.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Look at
there's too
look at
much
the
of
glyph.
that now.
Yeah, yeah. It's literally everything. I mean, and I worked in the food industry for a long time in that research firm I mentioned, and everything was how can we do things more efficiently? How can we produce more yield?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm a big advocate for is getting away from glyphosate. Right, glyphosate is in everything that we
Mhm.
consume, and it's used as
It's in everything, though.
a weed killer. But here's the problem: is that it's used also off label for something called desiccation. So when you're about to harvest a crop, they spray extra glyphosate on the crop right before they harvest it because it dries it faster, it produces a bigger yield, and it's easier to harvest. So it's all about getting a bigger yield, but then it's on every bit of sugar, every bit of corn, every bit of wheat,
Yep.
and then we wonder why our immune systems are going haywire because we're being poisoned all the time.
And
And
why
so I look for
cancer is at an all-time
non-GMO.
high. And
Absolutely, but not just that. Here's what I found is if you look at, and this is an unpopular thing if you're working for the FDA or Monsanto or Bayer, but everything that glyphosate produces, if you look up what are the symptoms of glyphosate exposure, and the main symptom is metabolic disorder. So it's like diabetes. Basically, you're giving people diabetes. It causes the body to process these things slower and messes up our metabolism. And then you know what the funny thing is that Bayer and Pfizer were the same company, and Bayer bought Pfizer. So Pfizer makes all of the products, the
treatment.
drugs that treat metabolic disorder. Isn't that weird? So Bayer
Weird.
makes Monsanto and sells Monsanto, and then Pfizer sells the cure for the problem. So everything that we're doing is feeding into that. And then both of their executives cycle through the FDA and regulate the product. So if you don't have a problem with that, then you know why you're being poisoned slowly and why we're only living to 70 years old, or if that, right? So anyway, create your own market.
Yeah, beautifully said. I started to have a lot of questions. I mean, I grew up eating very clean, but not necessarily by choice. We grew up poor, which the irony of that for me is growing up poor in the country meant we ate a lot of
Food
fresh
you
food, a
grew.
lot of unprocessed food. And I was looking back at it, I feel lucky now.
Yeah.
But I started raising questions around this when I'd go to Europe and it didn't seem to matter where I ate. I always felt better after eating.
I,
And I'm
I can
like,
eat
why
bread
is
in
that?
Ireland all day. I can eat bread in
Yeah.
Ireland. I can eat it in France. I can eat it in the UK even because they're not allowed to use these things in their food, right?
And you
And
you
even
literally can feel it. It's
you
like,
can because you
why do
because
I?
you don't notice it. You're like, I just had a whole loaf of bread and I feel fine. Why is that? It's because you didn't have a little bit of poison with your meal, right?
Right.
Now the problem is that and this is why I believe, and we're going to go deep in the woods on food today. This is the topic of choice. So it's because we don't have universal healthcare in this country because I believe that we are the cattle, we are the product, and we are also the market. And if you're trying to increase your pharma market, why not prescribe a little bit of poison with every bit of food, and why cut it out of your food if the intention is a happy and healthy populace? Like in Europe, they're saying, you know what, that's bad for you, so we're not going to allow it in the food supply because we're paying for the treatment. We're paying for the healthcare. In Japan, you can't buy Frosted Flakes, you can't buy Rice Krispies because it's got BHT in it, which is simply a preservative to make food last longer, but it's a carcinogen. So
Yep.
I think we need to redefine our priorities in this country and decide: is the FDA on our side? Do they really make the rules so that we have a healthy food supply?
Yeah. So I got a few questions for you related to that.
Sure.
I was always concerned by Food and Drug Administration. Wait, how the fuck
Yeah.
did those two get put together?
That's right. That's right. And who's driving
Right.
the bus, right? Who's driving the
Right.
bus? And
Well,
again,
these are these are valid questions.
if you look at the people who are writing the regulations and writing the rules, they're lobbyists that work for the big food companies. Listen, and I'm not going to disclose anything, that I'm not supposed to, but I also had clients that made and worked in byproducts of things like the aluminum industry, right? So they would have phosphate plants that would take phosphate from the aluminum plants So these are just
As a filler.
byproducts, and then they would put
Yep.
it in your bread as something that made your bread squishy and rise correctly, right?
Yep.
You don't need this stuff in your food. They did it because they could sell it to the food companies. And I had
Well,
people sit right across the table. Let's just put this stuff in the water supply. And one of the VPs tapped me on the shoulder. She said, "I've got this one. Let me sit down there. You can go take a break." So I went outside to blow off some steam, but my blood boiled because I know what that stuff does. I know where
oh
it
yeah.
was used, and I know that it's made to create a docile and complacent populace. And so there's a
Yep.
lot of evil stuff that we put in our food supply that is not allowed in Europe, is not allowed in these other places that have socialized
Yeah,
medicine.
thousands of medications would not be approved in Europe, and
Oh
Well,
yeah,
thousands of ingredients in
but
foods.
so here's my question, and Jeff, I have a feeling I know where you stand here just by how you're framing a lot of these things.
sorry, I'm trying not to be too political on this, but it's
No, I love it.
yeah,
That's not that,
yeah.
but here's my question. Um, I have a hard time believing that it's intentional. In that,
Mm,
here's how I would say this to frame it as accurately as I can. I just don't think humans are that smart. In that, because if you were that smart, you would play a different game, I think. So
mm,
I hear a lot of people, and I grew up around it,
yep.
that like, you know, they subscribe to this idea that there is this evil mastermind group of people who are deliberately and willfully trying to control the world population through initiatives and agendas and through food supply and fill in the blank. And they're really doing it out of this desire to control everything,
Mm,
right? You got the World Economic Forum gets a lot of shit for this. There's a whole bunch of them, but who,
mm,
right? I have a hard time believing that humans are that smart. What's
mm,
much easier for me to get my head around is we are driven by power and profit. And so when I
yes.
hear, and I do think I would describe the action as evil, or at least not good. When I
Yep.
hear, hey, we have all of these byproducts, and you saw this in the oil industry. A lot of our supplements, especially our fatty based fat soluble supplements,
Yep.
AED, came as a byproduct from the petroleum industry, right? Because
Absolutely.
Homey was trying to make as much money as possible, and they either
Yep.
have to get rid of these products and dump them, or they sell
Yep.
them as
Byproducts.
fillers, as replacements. And so I see these, and so phosphate's the same thing. It's like I have a hard time getting my head around the idea that this is done with the intention to control the population. Now, I can get my head around easily. They know that it's going to hurt, and they don't care, right? That I can get,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, because profit is what their scorecard,
I think that's more so than the case. Yeah,
Yeah, and I,
is
and I
right?
that
think I think yeah, and I think I agree with the latter. I think one I would challenge the first statement though that we don't think that people are that smart. That's who I was working with. These were all PhDs, food scientists, right? That know what is allowed and what's not allowed, and where the lines are and where the lines aren't, and where the studies show it's
I
dangerous and where
think
the
there
studies
certainly are
don't
people.
demonstrate it's dangerous.
I certainly think there are people that are smart enough in power, for
Well,
sure. There's not enough people that are smart enough that can prevent the people in power to do these things. I don't know.
Well, here's the
clarifying what I
challenge also.
mean by smart is I don't mean having a PhD and understanding how things work biochemically and how this impacts and how to get around regulation
Yeah,
and
you're
how to
talking
play the
about
game.
being
That's not
master
the smart.
manipulators. Yeah, understood.
I'm talking
Yeah,
about thinking in terms of generations upon generations of agenda to deteriorate a society to a level where they become complacent and easy to deal with. I'm
I
talking
actually
about
think
political agendas that are designed like this stuff. And normally, I would consider like if you were to describe me, I think I lean right
sure.
when it comes to fiscal policy,
Mhm.
but I'm probably more left when it comes to social policy, mostly because
Yeah.
I am a huge fan of personal responsibility and freedom,
Yep.
right?
And I,
And normally it's not always, by the way, but more often than not, it's my hardcore right wing conservative friends that have conspiracy theories for for weeks. It's like nonstop. Like they constantly believe that there
That
is
someone's
this
out to get
evil
them.
force that is working
You mean you
against
mean you
society.
mean you mean Sebastian that you mean you're talking about like people that are malevolent and
I'm
you
talking
know
about people whose entire goal, like everything is the amount of conspiracy theories I've heard in 40 years of being alive. Well, there's probably one I haven't heard, and they just make me
Okay,
laugh for the most part.
I'll, gi-
And
I'll
and
give you.
the and
I'll
the
fill in the
best
gaps then.
lies are
Yeah.
60% truth, right? So
Okay.
it's like
Yeah.
there's enough truth to them, but it's my whole point. My point I'm trying to get to is I don't think humanity, in my opinion, is still very primitive and not
Sure.
smart enough to pull this off, is what I'm saying.
you're
Okay.
If they
saying
So
were
in
that
terms
smart
that's
of
enough,
fair.
in
and
terms of people
if
being
they were
malevolent,
smart enough to pull it off, then we
Yeah.
would be doing it a different way. Because there's
you're saying
much,
And that's
much
fair.
better ways to do this.
people aren't smart
And
enough in terms of being malevolent, but Jeff is talking about smart people in terms of like education and like I don't even think that if you're going into the scientific field in the first place, there's not a malevolent morsel in your body usually because like you have a higher purpose and cause and you're not gonna I don't know like I
Uh,
feel like
this is
the
why.
science
This
is
is why I think.
otherwise.
Yeah, this is why I think there needs to be, and I've talked about this publicly before. I think there needs to be the equivalent of a Hippocratic oath, but for food scientists as well.
100%.
So when doctors
Well
take
said.
an oath
I
to
agree.
do no harm, and I would also agree, personally,
That's
I was
brilliant,
pretty,
Jeff.
I
Why
was
don't
pretty
we have that?
I was pretty conservative growing up. I voted for Bush Jr. my first election, and all through college, I was pretty conservative, to be honest. Socially, though, I do believe in social justice. I believe I don't want my kids to be the fortunate ones in a world of despair. I want everyone to have an opportunity
Yeah.
to live a good life. I'm an activist when it comes to speaking out for other oppressed people, and I strongly believe in that. My kids believe in that. But on that note, I also think that evil does exist in the world. I think that people are opportunistic to the point where greed takes over in decision making, and they say, you know what, screw everybody else, I'm going to get mine. And I
Yep.
think there's also on the other level, though, of that kind of conspiracy that you mentioned, there's been some horrific experiments done on populations in our time,
Oh,
not
100%.
before and during when we were alive, and those were both evil, opportunistic, malevolently aligned, and seeking to control populations.
You're talking about like
Because
eugenics, things like that.
not just eugenics, but testing chemicals on people,
Well,
chemical
how about
castration, or
2020? Anyone?
oh my
2020,
god,
anyone?
yeah. So yeah,
I don't know.
so it's
I kind of have a contrary view to that in terms of
Which,
vaccines.
so when
Sebastian,
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
So
Go ahead.
when you look at these experiments, like there's a famous experiment in a prison. If you set up a prison experiment and you take 100 random strangers and you put them in a room and then you divide the room in half, and half are the prisoners and half are the guards, within a day and a half they had to shut down the experiment because it turned psychotic. So humans do have a capacity for control, because it means if I'm in control, I don't have to worry. So I'm safe if I'm in control, and that is used in our population in a lot of different places, whether it's in the police state or otherwise, to affect control on others' population. Today, though, and for the first time in history, it's much easier to erase a population with a dirty bomb or whatever it is than to control a population, and that's also one of the keys to power that are held today. And we need to be cognizant of that. We need to protect other populations from, because otherwise it eventually will become us. Today, they came for me because I'm an artist, but they didn't come for my friend. And he didn't speak up for me because he's not an artist. So these are the things that we need to be wary of. And like we talked about last time, history is cyclical. It repeats itself. And I don't know about you, but I've read about some horrific things that the Nazis did during World War II in experimenting with populations with things like fluoride to make those populations they were controlling to be docile. And those same chemists came over to the US after that. And guess what? In the 1950s, it became a custom to put fluoride in our water to prevent cavities and caries,
Yeah.
dental caries. So there are precedents there, and it's disturbing. So part of that you can say floods over into the kind of you know conspiracy theories, but part of it is based in fact, in the fact that this has happened in population. So just to be
But
wary of those things.
the capacity for power and control
Yep.
is in human nature.
Yep.
That I do not regard as intelligence, but animal instinct.
That's right.
Which is why
Survival.
I'm saying if there was a level of intelligence there, we wouldn't be this primitive. I think we still operate. I think humans give themselves way too much credit in thinking that they are above animals, which is
That's
part
right.
of the problem why we treat animals the way we do anyway, which is the illusion of separation. But we are more animal than not, right?
Yeah, I think
Power and
elephants should be in
control
control.
isn't an intelligence; it's an instinct. That's why I mean, like,
yeah.
go
I
ahead.
think elephants and higher species of mammals should be in control, to be honest. So,
Dolphins.
but
Dolphins.
compassion is the ultimate sign of intelligence, I believe. You know,
Well,
and I think
surrendering
understanding
control, surrendering the
empathy.
illusion of control is the hallmark of an intelligent species.
Yeah,
That's my point. When I'll know that we're not as primitive when we stop solving our problems with violence and control. Right? That's the biggest sign of a species that is still pretty in the dark.
primitive. Yeah, I
So for me,
totally
I'm
agree.
mostly compassionate to the human condition because I look at it like, well, what are they trying to solve for? What do they believe that they're doing? And there are many, including frickin' Hitler, who was arguably the most vile human in the last 100 years.
Right.
Probably a handful of them, but he's right on that
He
short
had some
list.
friends like
He
Himmler. Himmler, I think, was up there, right? So I think he
he
was
did
the
have some
architect.
friends.
Yeah, yeah. He
Yeah,
had some friends.
and Stalin and Lenin and the whole ilk kind of ran together. Mussolini, Hitler kind of
So
becomes the poster boy for that group, though. But
that's right.
but if you study them, which I
Yep.
wouldn't unless you're just curious about the human condition, you'll notice that they truly believed, as far as I can tell, that they were doing right.
They were in the right.
Right? They believed that
They
they
were
were
just.
bettering humanity and they were bettering the world, which again should tell us everything we need to know about the human condition. And that's
Shocking.
fascinating to me to see. And so I agree. Brilliant point about taking a Hippocratic oath about food and the food administration, and maybe we
And
look
I'll
at
tell you
things
where that came
differently. But
from. Yeah. So that came from. So a few years ago, when I was leaving Connecticut, I was involved with a green chemistry coalition in the capital, and we went for it was like a meeting, and I knew that there were some food scientists there, and I knew that there were some chemists there and agricultural, and they were calling for clean policies. They were calling on our state legislators in Connecticut to, and I was very active in kind of politics and I ran for local office in Connecticut, and I was working to get on the Planning and Zoning Commission and economic development as well, because I thought that economic policies and development could help improve different municipalities, and I believe that local government still is what controls the majority of what happens in this country. So we were going to the state house. We were trying to figure out how do we get the message to these legislators, and when we got there for this meeting, there were lobbyists who were already there, and I met this young lobbyist. And he had come from my school, the University of Hartford, and he was lobbying for the opposite, right? He was lobbying for the food companies that didn't want regulations on these. I think it was certain plastics that were used for water bottles and containers and things like that at the time, and it was like
lovely.
PCBs or whatever. But the challenge was if you ban one letter of PCBs, then they come out with PCAs or PCGs or whatever. There's always a way around the legislation that you wrote. But the fact that these kids that were really bright, this one lobbyist reported to the president of my school, who was a really good friend of mine, Walt Harrison, and I wrote a note to Walt that day, and I said, "Listen, one of your proteges is here at the Capitol as a lobbyist, fighting for the opposite of clean chemistry in this industry, in the food industry, and the water, and providing safe water for people." I said he seems a little misguided, and it was opportunistic. He got a great offer from a lobby firm out of college, and he took it. And now he's advocating for the policies of these people that are opportunistic and greedy. And I thought that was a really sad moment. And that's when I came up with that. I thought, you know what? If you're going to go to school for chemistry, your goal is to improve the world. You want to make a difference. People naturally want to make a difference and do well. Do well by doing good. And we give our populace a lot of opportunities to do well by doing bad. And that's what causes and is the root of a
So,
lot of the evil.
so the
So
way
I
to
thought the way to do this is in school, you take an oath. When you graduate, you want a chemistry degree? Great. You're going to pledge that you're going to do good with this and you're going to represent your school and the people that provided you these opportunities by saying,
the
I
way
won't do any
to
harm.
the way to
Go ahead.
really
Sorry.
address it is through, I
I
think,
love it, Jeff.
in my opinion, the way to address it is through licensing. I'll give you two examples. So
Yep.
licensing is most strict in the financial world and the medical world.
Yep.
So I was talking to Dr. Asif. He's a cardiologist, and he has a big practice. And he said that when he was working for the hospital system, he was saying that to be the hospital administrator, you could have had a felony and done all these ridiculous things. And if you made one little mistake as a doctor, like you would have, you'd be, regulated in some way, and you
Sure.
could potentially lose your license and all these things. So
Yep.
I think when there's higher scrutiny, there's less of a likelihood that, things happen, because first of all, people don't want to continue in their career. They don't want to lose their license, but there's just more of an eye on like what's going on,
Yep.
So
I
I think,
totally agree.
so I thought that was really funny what he said. That you could be a hospital administrator, you could be running the hospital, and
As a felon.
had a felony in the past, but because you worked your way up, now you have, which is
Yeah.
that's
Listen,
crazy.
I'm all for second chances and cleaning up a past, but at the same time, I think that licensing is a good idea. When doctors stand up and they get their medical license, they say, I promise first to do no harm. And I think that should go for a lot of these industries. And I'll just give you a quick example real quick, Sebastian. Sorry. So one of the ways in which I think, you see the opposite of that, though, is with like in the dental industry, that things like fluoride, and sorry to harp on this, but fluoride was considered the standard. We're going to give fluoride for cavities. And if any dentist went against that, they were blacklisted. They could lose their license. Now, if it's a debate and we're talking about, an academic pursuit or, what is right and what is wrong, let's do the studies. Let's figure out what's healthy and what's not. But to blacklist somebody for changing their perspective on something shows me there's something under the surface, not quite stirring the Kool-Aid. You know what I mean?
Well, that's my concern with this idea of licensing. In a perfect world and higher consciousness, maybe licensing would be useful, but then at a higher level of consciousness, it probably wouldn't be necessary. What happens is when you unify people under one banner, they're afraid to lose their license, so they keep their mouth shut even when they disagree. And we saw that through COVID. There was a lot of people that did not agree, a lot of doctors that did not agree, and they were afraid to lose their license, so they kept their mouth shut. So that's a concern to me. That everything we're talking about right now is solved with the same explanation, which is the downside to a capitalist system where the scorecard is always about money is that money becomes the golden rule. Those with the money rule, right? Those with the gold rule, and those who want to make money rule. That's the concern. And you see this everywhere. The sharp kid that goes and works for a lobbyist, he's not solving for the moral side of that. He got hired to do a job, and he got hired to do a job well. It's the same like criminal defense attorneys generally don't give a shit whether the person's guilty or not. They look at it like, I get paid to defend this guy and to win in the court of law. So that's all they're solving for. The lobbyist gets paid a hell of a lot more money than if he goes to the public side, and they're like the multiples of 10. And he's like, I don't care. I'm trying to solve for my human condition, my individual condition, and I make more money doing this.
You know what he told
So
me?
that's the concern for me.
He said, maybe when I have kids and I'm older like you, I'll care about this stuff. And I said, by the time you're older and have kids and you're like me, it's going to be too late. It's going to be too late. You're the one solidifying your kid's future. And but he was thinking in those terms. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He did it anyway because it paid the bills.
That's
and he had
his
a nice
job.
apartment and a nice car.
Yeah.
So that's the
And that's
dangerous
what
thing
he would
about
say.
a capitalist society.
This is my job.
Yeah, that's right. So
that's
how do we?
Isn't that the case in any system though? Capitalistic system, communistic system. It's the same thing.
I mean, I was just
I
listening
think
to an interview
Winston Churchill famously said, I'm paraphrasing here, but capitalism sucks. It just happens to be the best of what we have.
That's right.
And I
Somebody,
agree in principle. Like the argue that what's happening in our society right now is a power struggle, and it's
yep.
not a moral power struggle. It's a who like we're between a free world or a free market and government. And so if the government doesn't feel like it has enough power, it's going to pummel the free market to gain more power. This isn't an enlightened group of people going, hey, we have crony capitalism and capitalism is bunk. They're going, hey, here's an opportunity for the power fucking band to shift
Shift.
sides.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's still all solving for power, which is what Jeff was bringing up. It's like it's game theory. This is a
Yeah.
play on power. So this is how we still have a primitive species
Well,
because
I'm glad you're delineating between capitalism and cronyism, though, because a lot of people, when they use bad examples of capitalism, they refer to cronyism as opposed to actual capitalism.
well,
I
Um,
think it's baked in. I think it's baked in. Unfortunately, it's not. It's not
but, but
always clear, but yeah.
But here
I don't
is
think
how the
so.
system can get better, right? Here's how the system
Yeah.
gets better. If people stop buying shit food, they'll change what they sell. We
Yep.
see way more organic food. Now, we could talk about how legit organic it is because there's always a game
Yep.
that's played there too.
Of
But we are
course.
seeing much better options come to market because people are wanting it and they're not buying it. The most on the free world side of things, the free market side of things, one of the most powerful words to capitalism is boycott. They very much
It
care
is.
about their brands and they very much care what the consumer will buy and won't buy. So
That's true.
there is a power there to change it. Just we got to educate humans enough to stop consuming the shit that's bad for them,
And to vote with
and
their
then they'll
dollars.
stop
Yeah.
making it.
That's right. No, we have a
Yeah,
chance to vote with our dollars every time we go to the store.
100%.
Unfortunately, when with monopolies and things like Amazon and Walmart's and those kind of things, where we give all our money to them because that's the cheapest place that we can buy good food, we give over our power to vote with our dollar to those larger companies. I don't know, but over the course of the pandemic and everywhere else, I'm pretty sure everybody's house had a package a day coming from Amazon. It
Easy.
became uncontrollable, and you can't boycott Amazon because everybody's getting their stuff from there, right? We can get back
Yeah.
to buying from our local stores and things like that. I want to go back to something you said earlier, Sebastian, about how you grew up, with less means, that you felt that you had a clean diet as a result of that. And today, unfortunately, that's not the case. Farms have failed. I mean, if they're
I
still
know.
subsidized, but they failed, and you can't get a clean source of food if you don't have resources. So there's two tiers, if not more. There's probably more that I don't even know about, of clean food and food that is processed and causes sickness and illness, right? So when you have the ability to eat food that you grow yourself in your yard, right? That is a great freedom that a lot of people don't have the benefit of. Having land to grow that food, having resources to farm that food and to produce it themselves. But that's what I'm trying to teach my kids to get back to, right? Is how do we make what we need here in our living room, right? We can grow plants and foods and greens and things like that today that you couldn't do as efficiently in the past, right?
Yeah.
So I think but it's something that those people that don't have the means have a hard time voting and being a part of that. Now, I do think that in the last couple of years, competition among clean food sources is getting better. So with that, you get prices that are reasonable.
Yeah.
We just went and did our shopping at Trader Joe's today because the prices for some of this organic produce is ridiculous now. It's amazing, almost to the point where I'm like, how are we afforded? Did we take over a country, or how is this price so high? I mean, we've literally taken over countries so that the cost of bananas stayed low in the past, right? So I know there's precedent there as well, but it's
You're not wrong.
once yeah, no, once we can get our food costs under control so that there isn't a two-tiered system of buying and keeping your family healthy with food. I think it was Socrates that said, "Let food be your medicine, and medicine be your food." It is the
Yeah.
crux and the most intimate relationship that we have that can keep us healthy. And so, I'm all
Yeah.
for regulating food. I'm all for making great decisions with the dollars that we have to vote with. But at the end of the day, we also need leadership that is going to recognize the root of the problem and make it so that you can't produce things that are going to harm people. That's it.
Dude, so there's a handful of things you said there I want to come back to. One, you said it's probably the broader discussion for another podcast we're running out of time for today, but I'd love to get into it.
Mm,
You said local governments run the country, essentially,
yeah.
um, which is really fascinating, and I'd love to maybe on another podcast we get into more of that. But to
Sure.
me, then the answer is how do we keep more of our food local? Like obviously bananas aren't going to be local as an
For
example, or
sure. For
pineapple,
sure.
unless we
Yep.
get into vertical farming, which could very well happen, and that could be a cool solution for some of these things. But there is a lot of food you can keep local and go farm to table and get involved with your local farms. And it is picking up.
Yep.
There is opportunities there. And now micro farming is legit. Like you can with very little space, if you care enough, you
Yep.
can produce at least 50% of the produce you need, in some cases more, you need for the year. So maybe you don't get
Yep.
yourself totally off the food grid, but you at least minimize, and now you know where your food's coming from, which it's interesting. This was my plan from when I was a kid, but this last year I made a big pivot to spend half my time in the country now, where I
Yep.
grew up, and we are
Love it.
full on homesteading. Although we're not there yet, we're doing it in phases. But so I'm watching a lot of videos, YouTube videos on what's latest and greatest and best practices, and I find it really fascinating. What I find even more fascinating is how many of the homesteading channels and the farmers that are crushing it right now came out of 2020. It was a
Yeah.
result of the pandemic that they're like, and
Yep.
I don't know how many of them, when I listen, they exclaim like, we decided to move out of the city. We decided to move into a rural area. And it was all as a result of COVID,
Yep. That's right.
right? So
That's
it's
right.
like, whether that was an intended or unintended consequence of what everybody thinks about 2020, I think it's super fascinating to see kind of the long tail effect of these decisions, and it has shifted a lot of people's perspective on what healthy looks like and what winning looks like and what freedom looks like. And so I'm super excited to see what we can do. But I agree with you in principle, Jeff. In some ways, we could argue that there's a privilege in being able to grow your own food that maybe wasn't the case at least 2 or 3 generations ago.
Yep.
A lot of people had gardens,
Yeah, that's right.
and we are
And you're seeing a lot of
centralizing.
that.
But I think good.
You're seeing a lot of that even in urban areas right now. Like people are doing rooftop gardens, they're doing gardens on vehicles. It's wild where this has come from, and it was a backlash, right? People said, "No, no more. I'm going to decide for myself what we make and put in our bodies," and I love that. I think that we talked about chickens last time, right? So I can hear my girls out there right now calling me to go let them out, and they want to go run around before while the sun's up, but we feed our chickens organic chicken feed. It's expensive, but I know what is in our eggs that I feed to my
Chicken
son every
meth.
day. Right? Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So, we're looking to increase our flock so that we are disaster proof. It's funny. When's the last time you went to some of the islands? Have you been to like the Caribbean recently or anything like that?
It's not since COVID.
So we
No.
went to St. Thomas recently, last January, and I thought it was wild. During the hurricane, I guess everybody released their kind of chickens, and there was a lot of damaged kind of property there. So there's
Best
a
chance of
massive,
survival.
yeah, but there's a massive population of just chickens running
Wild chickens.
everywhere on the island. Every
Yeah.
yard has a dozen chickens, right? So if there was another disaster, that would feed a lot of people. You could just cage them and catch their eggs, and I mean they're good for food.
Yeah.
But it's funny how
Yeah.
also in these disasters, nature provided, even in the worst circumstances, what comes of it is some new way for survival to happen. And in this
Yeah.
case, everybody started getting backyard chickens. Now I'm sure that
Yeah.
other things have gone up, like salmonella and other things, but we've never had a problem with it. Our kids handle the chickens every day, and there's nothing in the world better. Just saw a red-tailed hawk out there, so I got to be careful of
Oh yeah.
fresh eggs every day. I absolutely love it. So I'm a big believer in producing your own. We talked about last time becoming independent, right? Finding a way to get off the grid, get disconnected, talk to your neighbors, and trade and barter. I mean, we bring
Yeah.
eggs to our neighbors when they take care of the chickens. They come and take care of the chickens, and they get a dozen eggs. It's not a bad deal. So
No.
anyway,
That's yeah. Become independent in the pursuit of interdependence, where the fabric of individual communities stay strong. If
yep,
individual communities stay strong, the country stays strong,
yep.
right? And so that to me is the work, and I think we're going to see this trend over the next decade away from centralization.
I think we
Decentralize
have
our
to.
food, decentralize our energy, decentralize power. to me, that's the path to moving past being a primitive species. And I think there's lots of humanity, in albeit not always clean ways, expressing their desire for that.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be our work.
I totally agree. And I think, in order to avoid a lot of the conflict that is avoidable, I think all those things need to happen, right? I think that that's a really important part of our public discourse that needs to happen to teach each other, to raise the boats for everybody, because it is possible. There's plenty to go around. I just
Oh,
think that
100%.
we need to be willing to have conversations that challenge our own assumptions. So
I do agree with you that people are animalistic in that they rather just focus on getting more power than coming together and doing the right thing for the vast majority of the population.
yeah, and it's
I
out of
definitely
fear.
am very frustrated. And I think that's the state of what we're going through right now in our country is
Well,
that people are just
it's
so
better.
divisive.
It's better than it has been.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at history and you look at today, we may point the finger of today and what the fuck are we doing? But if you start looking throughout history, you're like, oh shit, we're not. We're doing
We're
better
the
than.
safest time in
Yeah,
history, in the history of the world. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
right. Which,
history
I'll agree with
repeats
you.
itself.
but I
But
am hopeful that consciousness is going to continue to rise, and we will make that shift as a group, as a people group, and I mean the world, not just an individual country. But it
That's right.
takes people asking more, expecting more, and really pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And changing people's perspectives. So I'd love for one of our next calls to be on why local government is important and how we drive
Awesome.
change from a local government standpoint. I think that's
Love it.
a great conversation, and I really, this is a big one for me. Controlling your food source and knowing what's going in your food is huge. And so I think this is something we'll probably revisit a few times over. I'm really into vertical farming. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. I think is super fascinating. So that's another place we could go to, and the opportunities that are probably going to be there, even with commercial real estate changing. And if you know anybody in the commercial real estate space, it's changing wildly. I think we're going to see vertical farms become part of that. We'll say
I think it
utopian
has to.
future.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
I
talk more
think
about that next time. But I do think that kind of vertical and kind of circular farming as well is where we're going. Right? They're taking buildings in Detroit and building them into fish factories, right? That grow
Yeah.
tilapia. They've got solar panels
Hydroponics.
that
Yep.
feed the hydroponics, and the hydroponics feed the fish. So
Yep.
it's coming, and hopefully we can expand on that in the next couple of calls. But I think we
Yeah.
recorded that
Love
one
it.
this time, right? Did we capture that one, Frank?
we did.
We
We
got
did.
it.
We
All right,
did.
good.
All right.
Thanks,
Maiden
sir.
voyage.
Awesome.
First printable version, so to speak.
Publish
It's
it.
good chatting
Right
with
on.
you guys.
Good to
Look
see you,
forward to our next
Sebastian.
call.
Frank, thank you, sir. We'll talk soon, guys. Be well. Cheers.